Hello and welcome to Worst Quality Crab, a podcast of Asian American stories and recipes from best quality hearts. I'm your host, Freesia Lee. Joining me as always is my husband and producer and partner in all of this, Sam.
Hello.
And on this episode, before we get into the guest, I will say that, look, it's before Thanksgiving. And even though I said in the beginning that this show wasn't going to do special dishes or focus on big holiday stuff, our guest today actually brought this dish to us. It is a holiday dish and it was completely unprompted. So we had to lean into it. And we're very excited that he's here. And we're very excited to talk about this dish. Our guest today is Ken Cho. He is a salesperson for a large arts nonprofit in Denver. He's the father to a 20-month-old daughter and is a self-proclaimed nerd extraordinaire. Ken, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you. I really love how Ken came to us. Ken is a friend of a former guest and just really liked our show. And immediately, I think, Ken, this is how I heard the story. You listened to the episode and you immediately said, like, I know what I would bring. I have a dish.
That's right.
Is that true?
It is true. You know, I listened to several episodes, loved all the dishes that was talked. And I was like, you know, a lot of the stories come from, as you said, like Asian American stories growing up, the foods that are important to them. And the dish I have is important to me, but it kind of transcends Asian American raising and just like, I guess, I kind of lived a somewhat atypical Asian American upbringing in that we don't have almost affinity for home cooked meals and things like that. So, the dish, which is what we call mom's Thanksgiving stuffing, is very American. However, it has some slight twists to it that are Korean influenced, but in general, it is, I want to call it average, but your typical Thanksgiving stuffing that goes with the turkey, whether you cook it outside of it or inside the turkey. It's something that is probably the one beloved dish my brother and I share from our mom.
Yeah. Oh, man. I love so much about this. First of all, I love that you listen and you're just like, I know the dish. Because honestly, like to stroke my own ego or whatever, like that is the only reaction that I really like crave of people is to like be like, oh, what would I think about? So I love that. Thank you. And also the idea that there is a typical Asian anything is like why we do this show.
Right.
Right. Like, because I think a lot of it, and we'll get into the dish and like I'm kind of diving in a little early, a little into the deep end. But I think, I felt like I didn't have a typical Asian American upbringing either, which is kind of what got us here. And then as we're talking to more and more people, realizing like what even is typical anyway, and typical by whose standards, and, what does that even all mean? So we are very glad to have you here because I think, if we like met on the street, I would think like, oh, Ken Cho, this very typical Asian American, like probably checks a lot of those Korean stereotype boxes that I know about. And then for you to kind of be on the other side and be like, well, I think it's atypical.
Yeah, part of what the podcast that resonated with me is that you and a lot of your guests, you and Sam, that is, you talk about your children and how the food, you present to them, or how you would like it to affect them in their upbringing. And as you mentioned before, I have a 20-month-old daughter, and that weighs a lot on my mind now. It's like, how do I introduce a diversity of foods to her, or something that comes from the Korean culture, and impress it upon them? Do I stress importance on it? Do I say you have to like this because your father is Korean American? And there's just a lot of things I can't turn off in my brain, and so that really, really resonated with me, which is why I absolutely adore the podcast at this point.
Welcome to the club of people that can't turn off their brains.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's talk about this Thanksgiving stuffing because Thanksgiving is upon us. Stuffing is maybe arguably my favorite thing to eat at Thanksgiving. So I definitely want to hear about this one. And maybe I'll make it. Tell me about it.
Yeah. Just to kind of set the stage. So my brother and I, he's younger than I, we grew up in the 70s and 80s. Our parents came over in the late 60s. And they had made the conscious decision when they had us to raise us all American. So they absolutely did not speak Korean to us. It was only English. They kind of really didn't introduce us to Korean foods until much later in our life when they kind of hit the panic button and said, "Oh no, we introduced nothing of our culture." And by then it was too late. And also during this time, you had a lot of what I call like the Betty Crocker convenience foods where you
Mhm.
just pop it out, put it in the microwave, and it's good to go. So that was a lot of our diet growing up. You know, the canned concentrated orange juice, which I guess is not a big deal these days. That was like, that's all we had in the household.
Mhm. Someone was just talking about that, and that was, like, the thing you had to have in your freezer at any given
That's
time,
right. You knew you made it as a family in America when you had concentrated juice.
which I never had. I know, I feel like I missed out, but I
Yeah.
do remember it at my after school program, and it was, like, the special thing if you got to help mix it.
Right. And so that really dictated a lot of what my mom made early on in our lives, just convenient foods. You know, it horrifies my wife because she is from the South, but like biscuits popped out from a can. That was a standard staple in the Cho household. And so that said, the stuffing's pretty straightforward. So it's, generally back then she used cubed stuffing, but these days you have like the natural fluffed up stuffing, which I prefer. She was a bit ahead of her time, I would say, by adding Italian sausage crumbled into the stuffing. And then she would add a can of creamed mushroom, which you add to everything back in the 80s.
Ooh.
And then she would put a lot of butter, but I have since substituted chicken stock into the stuffing mix. And then generally celery and whatever other vegetables, I've added carrots in the past. I've added, my mom liked black olives. She would add, that was kind of unique. My brother loves it. I am not that big a fan. I'm not a fan of the
Oh,
saltiness to it, but
interesting.
she loved it. But the two things she would add first is roasted chestnuts, diced up.
Okay.
And back then it was a pain because you actually had to roast the chestnuts and then peel them. But now, thanks to the glory of H Mart, you can buy ready made roasted peeled chestnuts in a bag.
Right, right, right.
Such a go to. And then the other thing she would add is a few sprinkles of gochujang. So
Oh.
add a little bit of spice kick to it. Not too much where it's noticeable, but it adds a nice little tingle to the stuffing. Yeah, she would bake it in bird. These days, I make it in bird as well as in the pan for those that are uncomfortable with it in bird.
Mhm. Or who just want it to be drier.
That's right, more crispier. And frankly, I make extras in a separate pan because my wife does love it, and she actually likes to have it not around Thanksgiving as well as my brother. So
Ooh.
yeah, so that's our mom's Thanksgiving stuffing.
Your house sounds like our house in that there are multiple trays and deliveries of stuffing,
Yep.
which I really appreciate. You said your mom didn't really cook Korean foods at all. Were you like aware as a kid that this was like a little bit Korean? And what was that like for you?
I did not. So I thought that was just your typical American stuffing. And it wasn't until I invited a Caucasian friend over for Thanksgiving one day that he was like, "What is this?" And I was like, "Oh, that's the chestnut." And he's like, "I've never had that, but it's delicious," which was a kind of a change of reaction for me because, growing up in the 80s, Asian food in general was still not a mainstream thing. And so
Mhm.
to have that kind of validation was like, oh, yeah, this is good. I'm not wrong. And I'm not going to be made fun of for it. But that was the first time I figured out this was not your typical Thanksgiving stuffing.
Yeah. What was that like for you?
It was it was a relief because, not to plug someone else's podcast, but like I'm also a big fan of David Chang, and that's because I feel like we have had very similar upbringing and experiences. We are pretty much of the same age. And so, when he talks a lot about how he was teased mercilessly for bringing like Korean foods into school, that same exact thing happened to me. I brought in a package of roasted seaweed, which now is all the rage. But
Mm-hmm.
once I brought that in, it was pretty bad. And so like that just is like forces the Pavlovian, response to never bring it up again, never bring up anything that is not mainstream America. And, you repress that. But yet, so to kind of be told that it's not American, but they enjoy it, that was a huge surprise to me because
Mm-hmm.
even to this day, I still find it a little weird that, Americans like Korean food. That just still messes with me.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what led up to you inviting your Caucasian friend to Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so this was actually post college. So, we're going deep into my upbringing. And it was, at that point, I felt comfortable that, like, my friend knew my family. He knew, obviously, we're Korean American, but it didn't weird him out. So I felt comfortable enough to invite someone over to have a meal with us. And I know my mom really liked my friend and vice versa. So it was a moment of comfort that I felt I was able to invite someone over to the house because I actually didn't do that often as a kid because of said experiences of just being teased for your culture.
Right.
So it sounds like your mom was doing a lot of, this like Pillsbury, Betty Crocker, whatever, but also some Korean foods, like just enough
Yeah,
for you to like feel that tension,
that's right.
maybe.
I'm going to come off as the world's worst son, but I actually think my mom was not a great cook. And
Oh, you were not the first to say this on this
okay.
show, not by a long shot.
And that's not to say she didn't have the ability. It's just that she lived a very busy life. At a certain point in our adolescence, she got heavily involved with her church, and that became her overriding priority. So cooking to her was just something she had to do to make sure her son stayed alive, and kind of just, I don't want to say phoned it in, but did what was enough, and then she would just do what was more important to her and at the time. Yeah, so, we would have, she makes, my brother likes a lot. I'm not a big fan of it, but she made pindetok, which is like a fried pancake. And I felt like hers was never crispy enough for me. I love the crisp. So, and, but again, these were foods that we felt were forced upon us. And then once my mom was, busy with her church, busy running businesses, and for all intents and purposes, we had become latchkey kids, left to our own devices. And,
Mm-hmm.
that's not to make us sound like Oliver Twist, but, we were basically given healthy allowances and just left to fend for ourselves. And so, two tween/teen boys being raised in the Chicagoland area, you're going to eat a lot of junk food. And that's exactly what we did. So it actually wasn't until I went to college where I did start, being exposed to diversified populations and foods and things like that. And um, I also grew 7 inches my freshman year in college. So I am
Wow.
6'1" now, but when I graduated high school, I was 5'4".
Holy
And so,
crap.
a lot of that's powered by food. So I ate everything in the dorm, and then I was just willing to eat everything when I wasn't before. Korean food actually made me gag as a middle and senior high schooler. But then, yeah, I don't know if it's late puberty or whatever it is. It's just your taste buds changed, and I just wanted to eat everything.
Yeah.
And so I would go out to Korean restaurants a lot, especially once, I was an actual adult working, things like that. And my mom would get so offended. She used to be like, why are you paying someone else to make you foods that I can make? And, I would say as an adult, I had a very contentious relationship with my mom. And I would just say, yeah, but your food is not good, which is like the worst thing a
Ouch.
child can say to their mom. And yeah, but you know, I have to say that honestly, I really did not enjoy her food. It just, I don't know, she wasn't using MSG or something like that. It just wasn't as tasty as when you pay for it in the restaurant. So
Yeah.
that's the guilt I have to carry for the rest of my days.
I mean,
But
Let me assuage you of that guilt slightly, if I may. Do you want to tell your mom you don't love her food? Not necessarily. But like objectively, was she maybe not that good of a cook? Very possibly.
That's where I'm landing. That is where I'm landing.
Like it's okay to say like, especially as an adult, I don't like these things. I don't want to eat them. And I think what's so interesting too, and you said she's really busy, and this has come up with other guests, is that like a lot of our parents, they didn't cook because they liked cooking. They cooked because they had to. They had to feed kids. They had to feed
Right.
spouses. And in some case, like that was the thing that forced them to like quote unquote learn to cook, but they learned like the bare minimum. And they didn't have DoorDash and there was no, like Postmates for anything. So they're just like, well, I'm going to do the best that I can. Nobody's here to teach me and no one's here to serve them otherwise. So they don't know the difference. And like, it is what it is. And then you get out into to college and sort of, the larger world and you realize like, oh, these things that I thought were good or good enough as a kid, actually, they're maybe okay at best. They're nostalgic. Sure. That's why we're here. But like, you realize like what it means for someone else to cook your cuisine or to cook your childhood foods. And then you are left to grapple with it, right? Like we are left having these conversations because of that tension, but like it doesn't objectively make their foods better.
Right. And the way I kind of persuade the pain to go away in my mind is that I am convinced that had my mom essentially just stayed a homemaker, and that's not to say she should have, but had she continued to just be a parent and cook for us more, like she would have been a good cook. Like her sister, my aunt, is a phenomenal cook, and they had a very small nuclear family, so I can't imagine that one sibling had more ability than the other. And so I just think it was a matter of priorities. And you're right. It's like she did what she had to, but she had other priorities, and that's her life, and I respect that.
Mhm. But she did give you the stuffing.
She did. She did, and we still make it to this day. My mom has been gone for I want to say 5 years now, and it's always going to be mom's Thanksgiving stuffing.
Do you make it?
I do. So I am in the fortunate position that my brother, my dad, and I all live in the same city, which we have not done for many years. So we all live in Denver, and we'll have my brother and dad come over for dinner. And my brother will always ask the week before, "Are you making mom's Thanksgiving stuffing?" It's never, "Are you making stuffing?" It's like, "Are you making mom's Thanksgiving stuffing?" And so, yeah, it carries on.
Do you make it the same way that she does?
I've tried it to the letter as much as she's related it to us because we would ask her how she would make it. And it's always, it was never written down. So it was, from the hip, this is how I made it. And you're trying to gauge exactly. And so I've tried to make it verbatim and I feel like I've improved it a little bit. So, like I said,
Mm.
I like to use the chicken stock instead of butter, which she did. And to toot my own horn, it's fancy chicken stock that my wife makes from turkey bones and chicken bones, and it's just like
Wow.
really a lot of effort. So it's the thanks like when I make the stuffing not during Thanksgiving, it's a bit more pedestrian that we're using regular chicken stock and things like that. But for Thanksgiving, we'll break out the fancy chicken stock from the freezer and use that in the stuffing.
Nice.
Other than that, it is pretty much the same. Like I said, I'll use the more flaky natural stuffing than the cube because that's a little too processed to me. But other than that, it is pretty much the same.
You mentioned that your wife likes this. Is your wife Asian?
She's not. So she is Caucasian, grew up in North Carolina. So she has her own pride. And when it comes to cooking, she cooks a lot. She makes the greatest biscuits. And like I said, it hurts her because every now and then, just for nostalgia's sake, I will buy that can of biscuit mix,
Yeah.
and she will just be like, "I understand you have to do it because of nostalgia, but I can't look at you when you eat it." And she's also, "Don't ever feed that to our child." So
I mean, I guess I don't know how to make biscuits or how easy they are, but sometimes, like, you could take those and like cut a little hole in them and fry them up, and they're basically a donut.
right, that's right. But no, that's one thing that's been weighing in my mind and my wife's mind is how do we introduce a diverse palette of foods to our daughter, whose name is Tilly, and what importance do we stress on it, if anything? Like, she actually has quite the appetite. So we have introduced Korean, Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese food to her, Indian, basically most of the Asian cultures. And she eats it all, which is great because, in those tasty sauces are vegetables that she manages to eat.
Hmm.
And as you guys have talked about before, I know like your job as a parent is to how do you hide the vegetables so that they eat it. That's every meal.
Yeah.
So, um, but yeah, it's like I actually don't cook Korean food myself. We have the benefit where we live in Denver that we're right next to Aurora, Colorado, which is the huge Korean community. So we just go out to eat. But, I would say I should probably cook more, and I did cook a lot more when I was not a parent, but for parent time.
So did I,
Yeah.
actually.
I cook a lot more Japanese dishes, and there are Korean foods I can cook, which are basically ready-made meals from H Mart, but I don't create anything from scratch. And I don't know if I have, frankly, the skill or patience to do so. So it's like, that goes along with like language school, cultural school. Is this
Hmm.
something that we, force our daughter to go to? I certainly had it forced on me and did not take to it. So it's, these are a lot of conversations that we're having now.
Yeah.
And, what is my identity? What do I try and impart on our daughter?
Well, let me ask you this. How important is Korean food to you personally?
I feel like I go through a lot of long stretches without, although we eat it more frequently now because that's kind of the go-to thing to do with my dad. He just wants to go out and eat, and usually it's Korean food. So, that's a very reliable event to do with my dad. Pop Pop is our daughter calls him. And,
Hmm.
so there is a frequent exposure to that. But then it is, do we stress the importance of this food, even though it is a thing we do with my dad, our family? Is it something that we stress, like, you have to appreciate this because it is part of your father's culture? I don't know. It's not that important to my identity, frankly. I enjoy it, but yeah.
I mean, look, I think you answered your own question in a couple of ways. First of all, as a parent, I will say that, like, if you tell her that, like, she has to do anything, forget it.
Yeah.
Having an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old like that, the idea that, like, you can get them to care about anything that you care about is just the fantasy of a childless person, in my opinion. We've tried, it doesn't work. But also, like, I think you kind of answered it in that, like, if it's not that important to you, then, like, just let it be what it is. And it sounds like it's actually something really special for her to do with Pop Pop, right? Like,
Yeah.
it can have a lot of meaning in that's the association with your dad. And if she were to be on a podcast in 30 years talking about her childhood foods, her thing might be like, when I was little, we went to eat Korean food with my grandfather. And like, that was really special. And otherwise, I ate everything else, and my dad cooked everything. And, there wasn't really like a central have to eat, and this is cultural and whatever. And that could just be really special and could be really organic for her.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's also, as I brought up before, like, times change. Like, it is very mainstream to eat Asian food in general,
Hmm.
and so it is not such a ostracized thing as it was for me. And so do we just treat it as nonchalant? Yeah, this is Korean food. This is your dad is Korean, so there you go. Do with it what you will.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, how's that feel? Saying it out loud.
It feels pretty straightforward and natural. And it's like there are certain things that I do cling to as a racial identity. Big shout out to your spam episode because that was near and dear to my heart because
Yeah.
my wife still will never understand it, but like I don't know.
Spam is the great Asian unifier.
It really is. It really is. And I listened to the episode and I was like, the way I like to make it is to cut it really thin and then fry it up so it's very crispy. And then I plop it into instant ramen as kind of
Hmm.
like what's supposed to be the chashu is now the spam.
Nice.
Nice.
yeah, so there will be certain things like that that I do kind of impress upon our daughter. But overall, yeah, it's like, here's rice, here's noodles, here's sauces.
Yeah.
Please eat it. Here's some vegetables.
Do you feel like you got some of that sort of like spam culture and ramen and things like that from your parents, or was that on your own?
No, so yeah, that came from my dad. So again, he was very much part of that decision. We're going to raise our boys all American. And then once we kind of hit that junior high, they panicked and said, oh no, they know nothing of our culture. So yeah, we were forced to go to Korean language school, which we totally rebelled against. You know, my brother got sent to Korea for a summer, and he's younger than I. And then I was, I had to do the same in high school. And yeah, it was kind of too late at that point. But my dad, having been in the army, the Korean army, as all Koreans males had to do back in the day, like that was one of his kind of treats to himself was spam. Like my mom actually did not like spam,
Mm.
and my dad loved it. So he, in his limited fashion, when he had to make meals for my brother and I, the spam would be kind of the special thing that he would not do all the time because his usual go-to, again, this was the 80s, would either be I remember a lot of hamburger helper, which I can't eat to this day because of that, or a rotisserie chicken because that's just a ready-made meal ready to go. But yeah, the spam, that came from him. And in my post high school, like self discovery of who I was and really diving into Asian cuisine, yeah, I just kind of glomped onto spam and never let go. And so I try and have a can of it in the house at all times.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. First of all, it's a great emergency food.
It really is.
It's just the best. And also, we like that Costco 8-pack. Just put that out there.
I did splurge one year and got the fancy gift box that they sell in Korea that cost like $40, and it
What?
was like,
Ooh.
yeah, it's a thing in Korea, so they worship it, and so yeah, they sell special gift boxes around the holidays for spam.
Oh my God. Am I just learning about this? Okay. I think what we know now is we need a spam episode part 2. Um, and also that's the only gift I want to give from now on.
There you go.
What makes it special? Is it just fancy packaging or different
Fancy
flavors?
packaging. The product itself is exactly the same. The can will be like in kind of like generic holiday print,
Uh-huh.
and it's like in a very fancy box, and it's kind of a splurge. It's like I want some of that fan, but the product is exactly the same. There's nothing changed from it.
Nice.
Oh, that's kind of great. I feel like there needs to be like the spam flavor sampler holiday pack where you just get like one of whatever is out. Is that a thing?
I don't think it is, but
Okay.
who makes spam? Hormel. It's like
Yeah.
Hormel. Get on it. There's a
Yes.
market there, please.
Hormel, get at us. We've got so many ideas for you.
Yeah. But that's one of the things that, I consider spam to be an Asian food and a Korean food. And so like, that's one things I do hold
Mm-hmm.
dear. There's a few other select dishes that like I like to get when I go out. Like, so tofu soup is one that's something I will try and impress on our daughter. But overall, yeah, I like all the Asian cuisines. They're all good.
Yeah. I want to go back to your childhood a little bit. What was your mom cooking that was Korean, or your dad that was Korean-ish when you were kids?
I would remember that my mom, so duck again, like I said, that was kind of a staple that she prided herself on it, but it was never crispy enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
So doenjang is a soup that she would also make. My brother likes, but again, I wasn't too fond of it. Japchae is another thing she would make. It was very easy. And then always loads of kimchi. Like I do remember like kimchi making parties she would have with her other mom friends where they would camp out in our backyard and like chop up all the ingredients and put it in
Oh.
the large
Mm-hmm.
jars, load it up with all the spices, and then they would slip it into the crawl space of our house and let it sit there for months. And then each mom would come by and take like their 2 jars to go home. And so,
That's awesome. Did
yeah.
you think that was awesome at the time? Or are you like, oh, this is a weird thing? But yeah.
No, not in the least. Yeah, like for some reason, our family was never one of those two fridge Asian families where you have the fridge in the kitchen and then you got the fridge in the garage or whatever that has all the kind of stinky food. So like we just had the one. And so like to go back to what we were talking about earlier with inviting my friend over, like I did not invite friends over many times because there was like the first time when my friend who I invited over opened up the fridge and he just gets hit with the wave of garlic kimchi and just like, what is this? And then you're just like, the shame sets in and all that. So yeah, it wasn't until like I started going to other Asian households and being like, oh, two fridges, that's genius. Why don't we have two fridges? So, and that's where the resentment sets in. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I was also a one fridge household, but also, I mean, in my estimation, we weren't quote unquote that Asian. But I always associated two fridges with like my family in Hawaii. And it's only now occurring to me that I probably did have friends that had two fridges and I didn't know it.
Yeah.
Sam, you were a one fridge household, right?
Yeah, one fridge. Two fridges is there's no room for that in
Yeah, and that
New
doesn't
York.
work in New York. Oh, maybe San Francisco too. It doesn't really work as well.
That's the other thing is that like the regionality of Asian American upbringing is a huge thing to me as well. So I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, which is very, you know, as un-Asian as it can get, very white bread suburbia. And so growing up, I would go to these large church retreats that my mom was part of and just meet kids from other parts of the country. And I was intimidating. Like Asian Americans from California, those guys had it together. And it's just like, whoa, what? Like they could speak two languages, they were hip, they had the style, but then like, yeah, they knew how to, pay respect to the elders, all the little cultural things that like I had no clue about.
Don't worry, those guys are still huge nerds here. It's fine.
Yeah, and then you had the New Yorkers who were like super urban and totally with it and didn't have to drive. They didn't know how to drive and they took pride in that. And just like, you're just like this cornfield guy, just like, I'm so out of place in two cultures. It's just like, yeah. So, yeah, I would say once I hit college, like, I wanted to learn about it all and try and get as comfortable with it. I had to, like, as embarrassing as it sounds, like, teach myself how to use chopsticks and, like, eat spicy food, eat kimchi, because I would always push it away, and it's just like, my mom would send me to Korea as a kid for the entire summer, going around the country, and I would lose a ton of weight just because I couldn't eat the food. And back
Mm.
then, Korea was not really an international country. So, like, I remember there was like the one Burger King by the US Army base in downtown Seoul you'd try to find a way to get to just to like
Hmm.
load up on something from back home. And yeah, it's a lot of regret now as an older adult. It's like you're an idiot. You should have enjoyed it more when you could have.
Were you going to Korea by yourself?
Yeah, so I would be sent off, and as a teenager from 16, yeah, 16 on, I'd get sent over there. You participate in these immersive camps, and just like it's just another planet, and it's like, man. And I think being a teenager is okay because you're just starting to grasp like cultural awareness and like you're able to make decisions that are very adult like. And it was an experience, and I would say it was a beneficial experience. Although, yeah, like the food was not good for me until I went to college and
Hmm.
grew 7 inches. So
Where did you go to college? Were you away from home?
no, well, I was away in that it was an hour away. So grew up in the Chicago suburbs. I went to Northern Illinois, which is out in the cornfields, and strangely enough, that's where I kind of started getting to know like other Asian Americans in a very social settings because, I grew up in a very upper middle class white suburb. And so it was like me and like three other Asian kids. And like that's just the whole other ball of wax that like I've unpacked with my therapist over many, many years. But that's where you find your tribe, so to speak. And so
Hmm.
got to know other folks, got educated, like you'd get some natural ribbing, but then they'd be like, oh, this guy really wants to learn about Korean culture and things like that. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, and it's just you open up your mind to not be so close-minded and think that high school is the end all be all, that there is a
Mhm.
world out there beyond those four walls of the classroom.
Oh my god. I'm sure we have no high school listeners, but if there is one, please know that high school is really not that great, and it's so
No,
much better.
it absolutely
It's
does. It
like
absolutely
I
does.
barely remember it. It's stupid. Just get out of there and go live a real life.
Yeah, and so after I graduated college, I worked in Chicago for a bit, but then managed to get a job in the Bay Area and moved out there a couple years during the .com .bomb era, and
Mhm.
loved my time because it was the first time I was in a city where like the firemen and the policemen were Asian Americans. And it was like that is so weird for me to see, but and then just the whole diversity of Asian food. Like people think of Chinese food, especially mainstream America. It's sweet and sour chicken, General Tso's, all
Mhm.
that. But to
Mhm.
learn about like Muslim Chinese food and like have that diversity and be exposed to it, I loved it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Do you remember the first time that you had and enjoyed Korean food?
absolutely yes. So
Oh, I didn't think I was going to get a yes out of that.
to kind of set the stage, I would go to Korea for these entire summers and would like what would be, these days probably like a $500 sushi meal, like sashimi, sushi, and I would like eat a piece and then have to like retch into my napkin because that's how I reacted. That's who I was. So, it was in a restaurant in Chicago, Koreatown. I had kind of gotten hooked into the Korean American culture there and ordering something in pretty bad Korean, but in Korean nonetheless, and getting served which is my favorite meal, which is sundu, which is tofu soup,
Mhm.
and then just housing the entire bowl when, like I said, 4 years earlier, that would have made me physically retch because I thought it was so disgusting. But to like
Yeah.
eat and appreciate it and enjoy the spices and dipping the rice into the stew, and just yeah, it was quite a memory.
Wow. And you never looked back.
I never looked back, and I remember that because that was, part of a whole long night out drinking, and I had to go see my mom the next morning, and she, being a mom, would be like, "What'd you eat last night?" And I said, "I went to this restaurant and ordered sundubu." She was like, "I could have made that for you." I was like, "Yeah, but it was like 3 in the morning." So, but then she was kind of like, "Obama, not bad. You're eating Korean food finally." So, yeah, it was kind of a moment of pride at that point.
Yeah, how do you think she felt? I mean, you said that like, she sort of was like, "Well, I could make you these things." But do you feel like her and I mean maybe even, your dad today like they have sort of enjoyed your evolution if quietly into themselves?
Yes, so I know for a fact that they did because in the 2000s, at that point, I was living in DC and I worked for a company that would send me overseas quite a bit. And so a lot of that was going to Korea. So oftentimes, at that point, they're both retired, they're traveling, they're in Korea a lot. So I would go to Korea for work, let them know I was in town, and then yeah, go out to restaurants with them and then, you know, converse in very bad Korean, but in Korean nonetheless. And like, so that I knew they were like, yes, he did not forget our heritage. And there were a couple points where my mom tried to ambush me with like potential spouses when
Oh.
total ambushes, yeah. And it's just like we're gonna meet on my terms from now. So
Oh, like they brought a person?
yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
Oh, that is aggressive and also a little
Super
bit of
aggressive.
respect. A
Super.
little
So
little respect.
I gave a little respect because I knew at that point they were like, all right, he's not the black sheep of the family. He does not totally turn his back to the culture. Like he's here, he's with us, and so we feel comfortable enough to, to
Yeah.
ambush him. Like
Man, that's a mom game.
it was total mom game, and it was one of the few times that, because after that we had a talk. And I was like, that can't happen again.
Nice. I guess, like, how do you feel about your evolution of Korean food?
I think it has gone the full gamut. Like, there is not anything I won't eat. I still chuckle that Korean barbecue is like super popular because let's be honest, who's not going to enjoy char grilled marinated meats? But
Mm-hmm.
the fact is that your average Korean doesn't eat that every day. That is a special occasion type
Right.
thing. So like to be able to eat all the other things, appreciate the banchans, all that stuff. It's like I feel like I have come full circle, and that's what weighs on my mind. It's like, how much of that do I try and impress on our daughter? Do I try and force it? I'm going to say no, because like you said, you try and do that, they're just going to rebel. But my wife and I have talked about language culture schools down the road, and I'm always like, we can offer it, but I can tell you if we force it, she probably is going to do her best to sabotage it. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure this is every parent, but just like, our child is 20 months old, and I can't turn off my brain thinking about high schools because I'm trying not to be the Asian tiger parent. It's like,
Mm-hmm. Good luck.
yeah,
No, I mean, I will say, now that we have three of them, as they get older, it gets, I want to say for us, it got a little bit easier, or for me anyway, it got a little bit easier to turn some of that off just because, like, you really have no idea, right? Even when it comes to, like, I want to go to this preschool, but we didn't get in,
yeah,
or, any number of things that could happen, like a full pandemic.
yep.
And then you see your kids starting kindergarten virtually, and you're like, well, how will we be paying for this
I
decades from
mean,
now? And there's no
yeah,
controlling it, right? And it's just doing the best that you can in the moment and making the choices that are right for you in the moment and, maybe a couple of moments ahead. But like, who knows? Right? Like, we didn't know that K-pop was going to be what K-pop was like 5 years ago.
yeah, that still messes with my head as well. But it's that kind of leads to another topic. It's just like, our child is biracial, and it's like, how do we approach that? Do we ignore it, or do we celebrate it? It's just like, it's a lot of hard topics that I'm kind of like dreading, but also kind of getting into, like, how should we approach this? How do I want to approach it? How do I bring it up?
Hmm.
And I know that's a subject that's been brought up many times in previous episodes. It's like, what's the term that I guess is, I always thought it was Chinese in origin, but I guess it's Hawaiian, the hapa.
Hapa.
It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, there are some terms in Korean which are not, that they are straight up derogatory. And it's like,
Hmm.
how do we approach that if she's confronted with that, and yeah, it never turns off.
I mean, it never turns off. I think the nice thing now, right? Like, that was how I grew up in the 80s, feeling like not enough of one and not enough of the other, and too much and too much
Yeah,
and all of the things. Even here in San Francisco, where you would think it would be like very, who cares and whatever.
right.
And I think really it has more to do with just how you, as her parents, engage with that. And also, there is so much more out there in terms of representation, why we do the show, in terms of like guidance for you as parents, things for her to relate to. I just saw there's a new book coming out. It's called Mostly Me, and it is a hapa writer and a hapa illustrator. But it's that, right? It's like having things that didn't exist when I was a kid, but like having representation of what it's like to be
Right.
hapa, to be multicultural, multi-ethnic, and more that like there are many more of us, many more of her than there used to be. If you guys ever want to come out to the Bay Area, we're everywhere here.
Oh, yeah, I was just there actually, just by myself, and yeah, we are trying to get back there. Um, Unfortunately, our daughter has turned out to be one of those nightmare air travelers, so we're waiting a little bit longer.
Fair. But when you come, right, like
Yep,
she is one, like she is the majority
yep,
almost for kids here. And so, I think that like it's daunting for us as parents to think about how we shape our kids' identity because we grew up in a time where like our parents couldn't provide that for us. And there wasn't the conversation in media and culture about what it means to, think about your own identity, even at all. And now we're in a place where like we have the privilege to do that. And it's kind of a burden. But I think that like just even having the space to have those conversations will ultimately like be very, very beneficial to our kids and to their own sense of self and how they sort of relate to their own, choosing of identities in ways that like we are only grappling with now at 40-ish, give or take, that our kids get to like have conversations about very casually when they're like 5 and 6 and 7.
Yeah, no, and that's something I do take solace from is that, Asian Americans are here to stay, and it is Asian culture is much more mainstream and accepted, and I take positives from that. That like, yes, you know, for example, when I started high school, the movie 16 Candles had just come out. Not great for nerdy looking Asian guys.
Nope.
So, so yeah, that we talked about K-pop, J-pop, all just like Asian dramas, anime, whatever. It's just like it is now becoming so ingrained that it's a benefit as opposed to a detriment, as it was in my youth. So I take positives from that, and I feel good about the future. But yeah, it's still hard to turn off the brain about all the
Yeah.
worrying.
I mean, yeah. That's also what it means to be any parent, I think.
Yeah,
Right? It's like that little piece that lives outside of you that you wish you could control and you totally can't.
yeah.
To go back to mom's Thanksgiving stuffing, are you making this for Thanksgiving?
Absolutely. So we are going to my in-laws in North Carolina with the whole family, and it has been requested that I make it for Thanksgiving. So my father-in-law will take care of the bird. I will take care of the stuffing, and everyone's got their own assignments, but mine is mom's Thanksgiving stuffing. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Have your in-laws had it before?
They have, and they enjoyed it as well. So I think the only change I make is I don't put the pinches of gochujang in there just to like have it and just put in pepper and salt, and so not to have like the spicy component. But other than that, it is unchanged.
Has your daughter tried it yet?
She has not. No, she has because I made it this past summer, and so she's tried it, and it's flavored carbs, so she loves it, and will eat whole handfuls of it at a time.
Um, I just want to eat stuffing now. That's
Yeah,
it. It's the only thing I want to
we're in
eat
that
now.
season. We're in that
I
season
know.
where, yeah, the turkey stuffing is my pumpkin spice. Like I could eat that all day long.
Oh my God, I need that on a t-shirt or like a sticker because I do
Yeah,
not fuck with pumpkin spice lattes,
no,
but I will stuffing. Oh yeah.
get on the merch.
Seriously. It's really interesting because I think that like stuffing is in some ways so personal. Like my mom makes stuffing and she more or less makes the same one that she's made for the last 35 years.
Nice.
And I always like it. And at the same time, when someone brings me like a new stuffing or there's like some potluck or whatever, and there's one that's just like really delicious, then I just like want that all of the time. Or like I want to have that recipe. And it's
Yep.
it's this weird thing of being like, oh, I wish I had a new stuffing recipe because like I want this thing that is delicious. But also I can't not have my mom's or like make a version of it
Right.
because then I just haven't checked like a nostalgia box for the season. Maybe stuffing is just one of those dishes, right? That it is
Yeah.
like anybody can make mashed potatoes and they can be very good or not, but stuffing is so personal.
It is, but as you said, that's like every dish that's been brought up on this podcast. And I've looked at the recipes, and my intent is to make them all. But I think it's like, will I be doing the person who holds us near and dear right by making it? And what if it doesn't taste up to their? It's like again, that's all part of the brain, just never shutting off, just kind of going too much off the deep end.
Well, I will say on behalf of all of our past guests, we encourage you to make them as you see fit. Because I will say I have made almost all of them. The secret lie, I haven't made everything that's in our pictures on Instagram, but most of it. And I know that I haven't got some of it right. But like, did we like it and did we eat it? Absolutely.
Nice.
Will we make some of it again? Definitely. Am I making it my own way? Yes, because I will never know.
Right.
Right. And that's the thing. And it is sort of the thing too, to go back to like what your mom was making and then what you had in a restaurant. You don't really know until you have something to compare it to. So when we're making dishes from our guests, when I make your mom's Thanksgiving stuffing, because I won't actually know if I've gotten it right. But I think the intent is to just try someone else's dish and find a place and a flavor where you love it too. And that's it.
I like that. Yeah.
Right? You know, and I think that that's like for you and your mom's stuffing, like as you continue to make it. And I can imagine someday as your daughter makes it, it will have evolved. It won't be exactly what your mom made, but the nostalgic component will be there. The specialness will be there. And like the taste might be a little bit different, but everything that's important about it will be what sees it through to the next generation and for years and years and years to come.
Adding on to that, I just got an idea that maybe we should make a special achievement badge for our listeners who have made all the recipes.
Yes.
Cheese.
Oh my God.
Gamify the podcast.
Exactly.
Oh my God, listeners out there, if you have made something, DM us. You could be our first achievement badge recipient. I love that.
We got to come up with the hashtag. We got to get the campaign going. I like it.
Look, we want to make stickers. Can be one of them for sure. Or some sort of like verified check, not a check, like a fork. Chopsticks.
Chopsticks
and soup spoon. Okay, we've gone off the deep end now. Which is the best place to be? Anything else, Ken?
No, this was quite cathartic. You know, I think someone else mentioned that this was their therapy. It very much feels like it. So I appreciate it. I had fun.
Well, we are so glad that you could be here. You know, again, I started the show with the intent of like, we didn't want to do really super special, like once a year dishes. But since you brought this to us, I couldn't say no to it. Stuffing just has such a special place in my heart. And you had such a great story around this. Listeners at home, if you would like to make Ken's mom's Thanksgiving stuffing, we will do our best to get an approximation of the recipe up so you can try to make it yourself. It will be Ken's version of his mom's shoot from the hip version. And again, we just encourage you to make it delicious to you in honor of Ken and his mom. I'm definitely going to make it, if not for Thanksgiving, sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas, because I could eat stuffing anytime.
The entire winter, really.
Are you really? Right? It's just, it's the best. A hot tip, we like leftover Thanksgiving in a waffle iron. I'll just put that out there.
Ooh.
Yep, you're welcome. You're welcome, listeners. It's great for breakfast. Put an egg on top. Ken, if people want to find you on the internet, do you want them to? And if so, where can they?
I have a pretty unique name that's short and sweet, so it's pretty easy to find me on the socials. So I'm most active, like most old people, on Facebook, but I do have an Instagram account, which I mainly use it to look at stuff my wife sends me. But
yeah, fair.
I might have a TikTok account, maybe. But yeah, I think that's it.
All right. Well, Ken, thank you again for being here. This was really, really a nice conversation, a nice perspective that I think we haven't heard, but like is a very necessary conversation. And I will just point you back to the beginning that there is no such thing as being a typical Asian American. And we appreciate that about you.
Thanks. I had a fabulous time here. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. To all our listeners out there, thank you for going on this journey with us. Hope you are having a great Thanksgiving and maybe you'll make Ken's mom's Thanksgiving stuffing. Thanks everybody for being here, and listeners, we will talk to you next time.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy Thanksgiving. Bye.